Have you ever heard of Æthelred the Unready? A king so young he took the throne as a child, only to become one of the most controversial rulers in English history? A monarch whose name became a synonym for chaos, indecision, and disaster. Today we dive deep into the incredible and often misunderstood life of Æthelred the Unready, a king who reigned not once but twice and faced off against some of the fiercest Viking invaders the world had ever seen. Was he truly unready? Or was he a boy thrust into power too soon, surrounded by greedy nobles, Viking threats, and betrayal within his own court? From his mysterious rise after the murder of his brother Edward the Martyr, to the storm of Viking invasions that crippled England, to the powerful revenge he tried to take with blood money and massacres. This is the untold story of Æthelred II. So sit back and let's travel back over 1,000 years to a time when the fate of England hung by a thread, and one boy king would change the course of history forever. Part 1. A crown drenched in blood. Æthelred was born around 968 AD, the son of King Edgar the Peaceful and his second wife, Queen Æthelred. Edgar had another son, Edward, from an earlier marriage. When Edgar died in 975, a brutal succession crisis erupted. Edward, later known as Edward the Martyr, was older, and many nobles supported him. But Æthelred wanted her son Æthelred to be king. The struggle ended 3 years later in 978, when Edward was murdered at the age of 15, famously stabbed while visiting his stepmother at Corfe Castle. Many believed Æthelred orchestrated it, though no one was ever convicted. 10 years old, Æthelred was crowned King of England. But the boy king's reign began with whispers of treachery and murder, and his authority was weakened from day one. His court was divided, and the nobles around him were power-hungry. This fragile start would haunt Æthelred for the rest of his life. Part 2 is, the Viking storm returns. In the early years of his reign, England saw a period of peace, but beneath the surface, trouble brewed. By the 87s, the Vikings were back. Though Viking raids had died down in the time of King Edgar, under Æthelred, they returned with a vengeance. Starting with coastal attacks in Dorset, Cornwall, and Devon, these raids became larger and more brutal every year. The worst came in 99, at the Battle of Maldon, where English forces led by Earl Byrhtnoth faced the Danish invaders. The English were defeated, and the Vikings demanded tribute, a pattern that would define Æthelred's reign. To keep peace, Æthelred agreed to pay Danegeld, literally Dane money, huge bribes to Viking warlords to make them leave. But this strategy backfired. The more he paid, the more the Vikings came. He would pay tribute again in 994, and yet again in 1002, and in 1007, the total in silver weighed in tons, not pounds. England was bleeding wealth to its enemies, and Æthelred's reputation crumbled. Now here's part 3, Æthelred's court, power, politics, and paranoia. Æthelred's court was a battlefield in itself. He was surrounded by nobles, bishops, and advisors who all sought power. His laws were inconsistent. Charters and decisions were made and revoked rapidly, often influenced by whichever noble had his ear that week. But Æthelred wasn't a fool. He created one of the earliest examples of a royal bureaucracy in England. He relied heavily on the Witan, the king's council, perhaps too much. He also pushed for religious reforms and supported churches and monasteries. Some of the best preserved legal codes from the era come from his rule. Still, all of this was overshadowed by military disasters and the looming Viking threat. Part 4, the St. Brice's Day Massacre. By the year 1002, Æthelred had had enough of the Viking terror. That year, he made a shocking decision. He ordered the massacre of all Danes living in England, not just raiders but entire communities, men, women, and children. On St. Brice's Day, November 13th, English soldiers and civilians rose up and killed hundreds, maybe thousands, of Danes. Among the victims was Gunhilda, the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, the powerful Viking king of Denmark. This act did not stop the Viking raids. In fact, it provoked a terrifying revenge. In 1003, Sweyn Forkbeard invaded England with the intent of conquest. Æthelred's massacre had triggered the very thing he was trying to prevent, a full-scale Viking invasion. Now our part 5 is the fall of Æthelred. Sweyn's invasion was swift and brutal. Towns and cities burned. The English resistance was weak and uncoordinated. In 1013, Sweyn declared himself King of England, and Æthelred fled to Normandy. His escape was made easier because he had married Emma of Normandy in 1002, the daughter of the Norman Duke. With Emma, he had sons, including Edward the Confessor, a future king. Æthelred's first reign ended in exile, but fate wasn't done with him yet. In 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard died suddenly. The English nobles invited Æthelred back, on one condition: he must rule better. He promised reform and returned to claim the throne. But Sweyn's son, Cnut, had other plans. Cnut began a second invasion. Æthelred's health was failing. His army was weak. His nobles were divided. Some even defected to Cnut. Part 6. The Death of a King. Æthelred died on a 23rd of April, 1016, in London, aged around 48. He had ruled England for 38 years, one of the longest reigns of any Anglo-Saxon king, but also one of the most troubled. After his death, his son, Edmund Ironside, tried to defend the throne against Cnut, but the English cause ultimately collapsed. Cnut became king by the end of 1016, ushering in a new Danish dynasty. Æthelred was buried at Old St. Paul's Cathedral in London, though the original site no longer exists. His legacy was complex. He was not stupid nor evil, but he was a young king, trapped in an impossible situation, surrounded by poor counsel and powerful enemies. His nickname, Unready, better translates to badly advised. Part 7. Æthelred's legacy. Though remembered mostly for failure, Æthelred's reign laid some important groundwork. He issued some of the most extensive law codes of the Anglo-Saxon era. His use of coinage and taxes helped shape the English economy. His reign is a warning about poor leadership, but also about the dangers of internal division. His sons, particularly Edward the Confessor, would later play crucial roles in English history. Æthelred's mistakes had ripple effects for decades, even centuries, to come. Now at the end, that was the story of Æthelred the Unready, the boy king who ruled twice, fought Vikings, lost his kingdom, and left behind one of the most debated legacies in British history. Was he a weak ruler, a tragic figure, or simply a child placed in a crown far too heavy to bear? One thing is certain: the story of Æthelred is not one of simple failure. It is a story of survival, of politics, betrayal, fear, and an England teetering on the edge of collapse. If you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval royalty, make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts on Æthelred, and subscribe for more untold stories from history. Coming up next, the rise of Cnut the Great, the Viking who became King of England, Denmark, and Norway. Until then, stay curious, stay historical, and remember, even the most forgotten kings have stories worth telling.